This map of our intellectual history is intentionally fractured. For centuries, the construct neatly separated the rational breakthroughs of the scientific revolution from the discarded artifacts of Renaissance magic. But when we audit the record, an undeniable archival trace proves these supposedly separate disciplines were building on the exact same foundation. Both the scientist and the mystic sought the key to decode the universe, making absolute claims over reality itself. Reclaiming our sovereign agency requires seeing past this redacted pattern, recognizing that the bridge between reason and magic was never destroyed, only erased from the final blueprint. When we open the contemporary files on what is categorized as the esoteric, the labels are deliberately misleading. We have been conditioned to file this material under modern New Age spirituality, or to dismiss it as a collection of secret wisdom accessible only to an inner circle of elite initiates. The accepted narrative treats these traditions as strictly non-hegemonic, ideas that existed completely outside the mainstream or dominant system of serious intellectual history. The official ledger presents an additive history, a timeline where orthodox religion and rational science sit squarely in the center, while minor irrational traditions are shoved into the shadows as mere appendices to human progress. But the physical paper trail contradicts this separation. When we lay the historical manuscripts side by side, a different architecture becomes visible. The archive reveals that these alternative traditions were never actually sealed in a separate vault. They were part of a shared field of discourse, a continuous, highly integrated network of communication. The presence of these philosophical alternatives did not just exist in the margins. It is the exact friction between these competing options and the religious institutions attempting to take control over all aspects of human life that built the hegemonic cultures, the dominant systems we inhabit today. The organization of difference was not a matter of simply ignoring the mystic. It was a constant, structural negotiation of identity. We came looking for a history of outcasts, but the files reveal a strange synthesis. The architects of our modern reality didn't simply conquer the untamed thinking of the past, they absorbed it, utilized its absolute claims, and then carefully redacted the sources. The blueprint of Western progress relies heavily on the very esoteric foundations it officially rejects. If the established borders between rational progress and hidden wisdom were drawn retroactively to hide a shared origin, what happens when we examine the academic catalogers who actually drew those lines? But here is where the paper trail gets interesting. Pull the next file on the scholars attempting to study these historical shadows, and we find an ongoing structural failure. The academics cannot agree on the borders of the phenomenon they are actually looking at. They are constantly engaging in boundary work, drawing lines between fields to define what counts as acceptable science, orthodox religion, or forbidden magic. It is an archival categorization project built on shifting sand. Every attempt to build a permanent vault for esotericism eventually fractures under its own weight because the architects keep changing the blueprint to fit their own biases. The first major architectural attempt relies on rigid categorization. The archive shows scholars isolating a specific construct, a theoretical concept or idea, built on 4 strict characteristics: correspondences, living nature, imagination, transmutation. But when we cross-reference this map against the larger historical database, the borders immediately collapse. This structural model was engineered from a highly restricted set of early modern Christian sources. It intentionally redacts centuries of antiquity, Islamic philosophy, and modern thought. It is a circular vault Since the category is defined strictly by this one specific blueprint, nothing outside that exact blueprint is allowed to be filed inside. The next record in the collection changes everything. When the rigid categories failed, a new blueprint was drafted. The records show an alternative framework, the grand polemical narrative. This theory catalogues Western identity as an endless ancient war between exclusive monotheism and pagan cosmotheism. It claims that hegemonic cultures, the dominant or mainstream systems, constantly suppressed these untamed alternative ideas, pushing them into the dark. But the physical paper trail refuses to support this grand binary war. The supposed historical memory of absolute exclusive monotheism is an academic straw man, a modern concept that historically never existed. The grand narrative of a persecuted, hidden underground is an invention, projected backward onto a past that was actually far more pluralistic. Instead of a clean war between orthodoxy and hidden knowledge, the ledger reveals a continuous, messy dialectic of public rejection masking a deep, institutional fascination. The system never actually destroyed the anomaly. It simply reorganized the filing system. The structural anomaly is now fully visible. The institutional map has failed to contain the territory, and the historical ledgers do not support a clear-cut ancient war between acceptable truth and hidden knowledge. So, if the architectural borders we drew around these forbidden texts were a retroactive illusion, then what exactly is the blueprint we have been looking at? The next record in the collection changes everything. When we stop looking for a specific, marginalized group of outsiders, a much deeper architecture emerges from the archives. Esotericism is not an object. It is a structure. The ledger defines this structure with clinical precision, the claim of absolute knowledge. It is the pursuit of a totalizing vision of truth, a master key designed to answer all questions of human existence. This blueprint is everywhere. We find it in the forgotten journals of a 16th century scholar attempting to learn the end of the world from angels. We find it in the modern physicist's search for a grand unified theory of the cosmos. The attempt to decode the ultimate secrets of reality does not belong exclusively to the mystic. It is deeply embedded in the very foundation of contemporary science. The files show a misclassification. We assumed this knowledge was permanently locked away, reserved for initiates, guarded by an elite inner circle. But the physical paper trail proves otherwise. The documents reveal a continuous dialectic of concealment and revelation, a system where the truth is hidden only so it can be actively discovered. The knowledge was never inherently exclusive. The blueprint dictates that this absolute reality is accessible to anyone willing to follow two distinct human pathways: mediation and individual experience. Mediation, contacting intermediary entities or messengers for answers, functions the same whether it is an early modern philosopher conversing with an angel or a modern seeker channeling a higher power. Experience, entering an altered state of consciousness or deep meditation to grasp the absolute directly, deliberately bypasses the approved institutional channels. Consider this with us. Have you ever noticed how the most groundbreaking scientific theories, the frameworks that try to explain the fundamental fabric of reality, often sound exactly like ancient mysticism? Drop your favorite example in the comments. We are watching the exact same human drive express itself across centuries, simply changing its archival label from magic to mathematics. The ledgers show no true division. The search for the ultimate master key to the universe seamlessly crosses the boundary between the rational scientist and the irrational mystic. They are reading from the exact same structural blueprint, utilizing the exact same desire to conquer the unknown. But if this drive for totalizing knowledge is actually the shared foundation of our intellectual history, what happens to the categorization of the esoteric? If the margin is actually the center, what exactly have the architects been trying to quarantine? The archive holds one final, crucial ledger. Every time the dominant mainstream institutions attempted to suppress these alternative ideas, the structure responded. The records show that institutional suppression actually functioned as a homeostatic mechanism, a self-correcting system that automatically balances itself out. By trying to force this untamed thinking into the dark, the system generated the exact counterpressure needed to guarantee its survival. The very act of banning the search for absolute knowledge permanently hardwired it into our cultural foundation. We came looking for a hidden history of spiritual outcasts. What we found was the structural core of our own reality, and the key was always in our hands. The academic term Esotericism was never a permanent vault. It is a Wittgensteinian ladder, a temporary conceptual tool you use to climb up to a new vantage point. But once you understand the view, you no longer need the ladder. We needed the word to climb up and see the full, complex, and shared history of our culture. But now that the pattern is visible, now that we know the rational scientist and the mystic were reading from the exact same blueprint, we can kick the ladder away. The label is obsolete. The greatest revelation in this entire collection is not a piece of ancient magic. The real secret was the realization that the architects of our intellectual history deliberately engineered the shadows simply to conceal their own foundational blueprint. We are not isolated seekers trying to break into a hidden sanctuary. We are the inheritors of a shared, unbroken pursuit of absolute truth. The exit was never locked, we just finally found the door.